Okay. What we are doing tonight, we are taking what we know about fiscal policy and applying it to the current state of the economy, particularly production, inflation, and unemployment. So let's start with inflation. As you know, inflation is a rising general level of prices, and inflation will occur either when the aggregate demand curve shifts to the right or the aggregate supply curve shifts to the left, or both. This will cause inflation. Now, let's see what's going on in our economy with regards to the aggregate demand and aggregate supply curve. I might just say that we are experiencing, as of right now, the highest inflation that we've experienced from year to year in over 40 years. 1981 was the last time we've had this high of inflation, which is 8.5%, which means that the percentage change in the consumer price index over the last 12 months is 8.5%. Now, you have never experienced inflation in your lifetime. I have. I lived through the 60s and I lived through the 70s. In the 60s, you will recall, that's when the aggregate demand curve was shifting to the right as a result of all of this spending that was taking place. The Kennedy tax cut increased consumer spending, the Vietnam War increased government spending, and Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty also increased consumer spending. That was shifting the aggregate demand curve to the right. Prices were going up, but output was going up too. And unemployment was going down. I know you remember my story about how easy it was to get a job in those days. In the 1970s, however, it was the aggregate supply curve shifting to the left. And the aggregate supply curve was shifting to the left due to a spike in the price of petroleum. Now, petroleum is our most important natural resource because virtually everything has a petroleum cost component to it. Petroleum is what goes into plastic, man-made fibers, artificial materials, that kind of stuff. But even all natural fibers or things that are made out of wood still have to be transported, which requires gasoline, which is a derivative of petroleum. So everything has a petroleum cost component to it. When the price of petroleum goes up, the cost of producing things goes up. When the cost of producing things goes up, the profits from producing things go down. And when that happens, the aggregate supply curve shifts to the left. Today, we are seeing kind of a combination of both. The spending by government that occurred as a result of the COVID and the government trying to protect American citizens from the slowdown in the economy due to COVID, that's shifting the aggregate demand curve to the right. The rising price of petroleum plus problems with the supply chain, that's shifting the aggregate supply curve to the left. And as a result, we're experiencing the beginnings of inflation. Let's look here first at aggregate demand. As I mentioned to you, the aggregate demand curve is shifting to the right. And that's a result of about $5 trillion that the government spent in order to help the economy recover from COVID. In 2020, the federal government ran a budget deficit of about $3 trillion. Now, that's when the COVID was at its height. I mean, people began to panic right around March of 2020, and the economy went downhill in a hurry. I was afraid to go to the grocery store. As a matter of fact, at my local grocery store, they have it open exclusively for senior citizens, which I am. I'm a super senior, between something like 6 and 7 o'clock in the morning. You get there at 6 o'clock in the morning, only seniors are allowed in. Well, I went there because I'm figuring that there's not going to be many people there, and I minimize my chance of catching COVID. And even when I walked in there, I felt like I was walking into a death chamber. But there's still quite a few people in there. A lot of old timers, old fogies had the same idea that I did. But anyway, for me to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, go grocery shopping, that took a lot. But so that's what I did. So at the height of the panic, the businesses were shutting down. Everybody was afraid to go to work. They were afraid to get on a plane. They were afraid to get on a boat. They were afraid to travel. I'm looking at these TV shows, these news shows, where out the window you can see the streets of New York. And the streets of New York were vacant. And that's when, the budget deficit was about $3 trillion. This is, the government trying to stimulate the economy, trying to pay people for unemployment, trying to protect businesses, making them able to pay their workers through the Paycheck Protection Program who did come to work, but could be paid anyway, even though the businesses were not receiving new revenues. In 2021, it ran a budget deficit of about 2.8 trillion. So the budget deficit went down by a couple $100 billion. And for 2022, it will probably be closer to 1 trillion. So at the end of the year, we'll probably only have a $1 trillion deficit. So we can see these deficits going down. Now, I might just add that President Biden wanted to pass that Build Back Better program. Now, that would be $5 trillion worth of spending, but that spending was going to take place over 10 years. So we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if there's going to be a skinny version of that. We don't know what's going to be passed between now and then, but but for right now, it looks like the budget deficit is going to be about $1 trillion. $1 trillion is a lot of money. And $1 trillion injected into the economy through a budgetary deficit, that's going to shift that aggregate demand curve significantly to the right. Now, what role is consumer spending going to play in all of this? Consumer spending is increasing very much, year over year. Now, although wages are up, nominal wages, they're failing to keep up with inflation. They're about 5.6% up. Inflation is 8.5. So they're failing to keep up with inflation, meaning the purchasing power value of income, of course, that's the real value of income. The purchasing power value of income is going down, and as a result, less output is being purchased. So the consumer isn't responsible at all for that rightward shifting aggregate demand curve. Clearly, it's the government. As I mentioned before, in 2020, the budget deficit was about 3 trillion, which was 15% of the GDP. That's the highest it has been since World War II. 15% of the nation's gross domestic product. Now, in World War II, it peaked at 29.6% in 1943. Ordinarily, the total government spending is about 30% of the GDP. But the budgetary deficit, just the deficit in the year 2020 was 15% of the GDP. In 2021, it declined to about 12.4% of the GDP. And this year it'll be closer to 1 trillion, and in case, except for the case where President Biden gets a new infrastructure bill, then is Katie barred the door. That'll come closer, get it more in line with about 4% of the GDP, which is more realistic. And we'll shift the aggregate demand curve to the right, but by not an amazing amount. But that 15% and that 12.4% of GDP, that's going to shove that aggregate demand curve way to the right. And when that goes to the right, of course, prices are rising. Business investment has been down despite low interest rates. And that is because businesses lack confidence in the future performance of the economy. It is confidence in the future performance of the economy that will determine the CFO's assessment of the expected rate of return on investment. And if the CFO is pessimistic about the economy, those expected rates of return on investment will be low. And as a result, business investment will be low. So the consumer isn't spending very much. The businesses aren't spending very much. What about our balance of trade? That's foreigners spending on American products and American spending on foreign products. Now, worldwide merchandise trade flows decreased by about 7%, 7% since the beginning of the pandemic. 7%, that's significant. And it has sent our balance of trade deficit to an all-time high. Now, remember, budgetary deficits stimulate the economy, but the balance of trade deficit depresses the economy. That means Americans are buying more foreign goods than foreigners are buying more American goods. More spending is flowing out of our system through the purchases of imports than is flowing into our system through the purchases by foreigners of exports. So COVID has had a larger effect on the demand for American products than American demand for foreign products. And that is because COVID has just really shut down foreign economies. They haven't been as stimulated. They haven't had the ability to stimulate the economy like the American government has. And so their purchases have slowed down. But they're still selling to us. We're buying from them. They're not buying from us. And that is what has caused the balance of trade deficit to reach an all-time high. And this, of course, is suppressing the economy. This balance of trade deficit is working to shift the aggregate demand curve to the left. But net, the aggregate demand curve is shifting to the right, and I mean way to the right. Now, what about the aggregate supply curve? The aggregate supply curve is shifting to the left. Why is the aggregate supply curve shifting to the left? Well, we have these supply chain issues. COVID has slowed down the offloading of vessels that are shipping goods and imported resources from overseas. That should be and imported resources. Let me fix that right now. Shipping goods and imported. Oh, I screwed that up anyway. Imported, I'll get it later. Not only are goods and merchandise that we have purchased from foreign countries being stalled by these backups at American ports, but so are resources. And so the resources have a difficult time to getting to American firms in order to produce the products. What sort of resources do we import? Well, we import minerals, like those rare earth minerals to produce chips. We import nickel. There are a couple of other minerals that we have to import because we don't have a very big supply of it ourselves. And we also import petroleum. America has become a net importer of petroleum. Just a couple of years ago, it was a net exporter of petroleum. But when President Biden refocused on the Green New Deal, he kind of put the kibosh on domestic production of petroleum. Now, what is ironic is that when the domestic production of petroleum went down, the price of petroleum went way up. And so we have to get some petroleum. You can see this at the gas pumps. So we have to get some petroleum from somewhere. So where are we going to get petroleum from? Ironically, we're getting petroleum from Iran and Venezuela, two enemies of America. And what's even more ironic is that the production process and the type of oil that they are drilling for is dirtier than what can be achieved here in the United States. So anyway, whatever. I don't want to get political, although I tell you, you have a difficult time avoiding politics when you're talking about fiscal policy, as you know. The problem is that the prices of imported resources are going up, and they're having trouble getting to firms because of the supply chain issue. Also, the surge in COVID cases in China. China, as you know, have shut down several cities. They've locked the people in their apartments and their houses, and you can hear them, yeah, let me out of here. It's the most bizarre thing you've ever seen. People are screaming out their window, let me out, I'm hungry, I can't get anything to eat, I can't get anything. So they're locking down those cities. And so the amount of things produced in China are going way down. And so the delivery of goods and services, for example, computer chips that are imported by American car manufacturers. Now, because new automobiles are now scarcer, they can't build the automobiles because they don't have the computer chips. Then, because they are of a more limited supply, the price of new automobiles are going up. And even if you do buy one, you have to order one, and it takes a long time for your order to come in because of the chip shortage. As a result, the demand for used cars, which of course is a substitute good like butter and margarine, the demand for butter goes up. Sorry, the price of butter goes up, the demand for margarine goes up. In the same way, the price of new cars goes up, the demand for used cars goes up, and thus increasing their price. So the supply, the problem, the COVID in China is producing problems as well. That's also contributing to the leftward shift in the aggregate supply curve. And of course, the Russian invasion of Ukraine is going to produce problems as well. Number one, they have important minerals there, particularly Russia. Now, we were willing to deal with Russia, but now that they've invaded Ukraine, nobody wants to deal with them. We don't want any parts of Russia. We want to punish them, and we just don't want to deal with such an immoral country and government. You would, attack a sovereign nation for no reason. So we're not going to import any minerals from them. They provided us with almost all of our nickel, other minerals as well, including those rare earth minerals that I spoke about. Also, we've imported petroleum from Russia. We're not going to be doing that anymore. And Ukraine and Russia together make up some huge proportion of the total amount of wheat, maybe 30% of something that is produced in the entire world. So the production of wheat in Ukraine, of course, is going down, and we wouldn't buy Russian wheat anyway. So wheat is going to become more scarce, and all of this is also going to drive up the price of merchandise, and it's going to drive up the price of capital equipment, and especially the price of food, particularly that which is made out of wheat and grain. As a matter of fact, you may have heard on the news that there's expected to be a food shortage in the coming months. A food shortage. And for some reason, I'm having a difficult time finding there it is. Let's see. Okay. Now, the rising price of petroleum as I mentioned, that's another one. In the months leading up to the COVID-19 pandemic, U.S. oil production hit an all-time high of just below 13 million barrels per day. Now, as the pandemic unfolded, demand collapsed, of course, and production followed. Production also collapsed. And in by May of 2020, oil production had dropped by more than 3 million barrels a day. So petroleum is becoming more scarce. And when something becomes more scarce, of course, the price goes up. Moreover, America is now a net importer of petroleum, which itself is going to increase the price of petroleum because we have to buy it from foreigners, have to pay for the shipment over. We can't produce it ourselves. And so all of these things, the supply chain issue, the COVID surge in China, the Russia-Ukraine war, and the rising price of petroleum, all of these things are going to make that aggregate supply curve shift to the left. So we have the aggregate demand curve shifting to the right, and at the same time, we have the aggregate supply curve shifting to the left. Now, what is this doing to unemployment and jobs? Keep in mind that unemployment exists when there are members of the workforce without jobs. Members of the workforce without jobs. Currently, the unemployment rate is 3.6%. Now, this is very close to full employment. Full employment, as you know, is somewhere around 3% unemployment. Of course, that 3% exists because of the structural and frictional unemployments, which are those categories of natural unemployment. They're going to exist irrespective of how strong the economy is. So a 3% unemployment rate is considered full employment. So the current unemployment rate is 3.6%. Now, that's pretty good, but this statistic may be a little bit misleading. It might be a little bit misleading because the workforce has shrunk significantly. In other words, there is a very low workforce participation rate. Now, to be unemployed, you have to be a member of the workforce without a job. Now, you may not have a job, but if you're not a member of the workforce, you're not counted as unemployed. And so those people who have thrown up their hands and given up are no longer looking for work. They are not included in the workforce, and so they're not counted as being unemployed. If they're not counted as being unemployed, this would make the unemployment rate artificially low. But that's still a pretty low unemployment rate. So the point is that we haven't seen the economy stagnating as of yet. The rate of growth of the GDP has gone down, but the unemployment rate hasn't spiked up as yet. Now, in the 70s, when we were experiencing that leftward shifting aggregate supply curve, we had double-digit inflation and double-digit unemployment. Well, we don't have double-digit inflation yet. We're pretty close, 8.5%. That's not too far away from double-digit, but 3.6% unemployment, that's nowhere near double-digit unemployment. Of course, the difference is during the 1970s, the aggregate demand curve was not shifting to the right. But like the 1970s, the aggregate supply curve is definitely shifting to the left. Will this produce stagflation? Remember, stagflation is a combination of stagnation and inflation. You get a slow economy, but also inflation at the same time. Stagflation. This is cost push inflation. Well, we're not seeing this as of yet. We can't really say that we're going into stagflation because that unemployment rate is still so low. But like I said, we don't know how much of that low unemployment rate is caused by the fact that the workforce participation rate is so low. We just don't know that as of yet. So the unemployment rate is still low. We can't go by the unemployment rate to say that we're in stagnation. Wages are up. They're up 5.6% from a year ago. But much of this is due to the shortage of willing workers. It's also due to the fact that the federal government was paying workers a high wage, even though they weren't coming to work. Now, to force these workers to come back to work, the firms had to pay them more than what the government was paying. So this also accounts for the fact that wages are up. They're up 5.6% from a year ago. But as I mentioned before, they have failed to keep up with inflation. Inflation, as you know, is 5.8% for the last 12 months. Wage growth is 5.6%. So that means that the purchasing power value of income has gone down. The purchasing power value of a household's income has gone down. Even though their nominal wages are going up and they're seeing more dollar bills come through the front door, their purchasing power is going down. Inflation actually may get worse before it gets better, because the latest numbers on producer prices is 11.2% year over year. Now that's higher than the consumer prices. This is the percentage change in the producer price index. This is the merchandise that our producers are buying and converting into finished goods. That went up 11.2%. And of course, these in price increases in their resources will be passed on to the consumer somewhere down the line. I mean, I could be a little bit confident if producer prices were less than the consumer prices, but they're more. So that means eventually that these higher costs are going to be passed on to the consumer. And moreover, import prices have risen by 12.5%. And that's because imports are scarcer, and that's because firms, aren't producing as much, foreign firms. So import prices have risen by 12.5%. Now, what about job growth? As I mentioned, job growth is hard to tell on a net basis. The demand for workers in some industries will expand, like the healthcare industry. That's expected to grow. And of course, STEM careers are always good. Science, technology, engineering, and math. Those are always good. But leisure and hospitality industries will lose jobs over the coming years, as will transportation and utilities. So you kind of want to stay away from those things. But on a net basis, it's very, very difficult to tell what's going to happen to job growth. Unemployment rate is 3.6%, but once again, that may be accurate due to the low workforce participation rate. Now, what about interest rates? As long as inflation continues to surge, interest rates will continue to climb. Interest rates, as you know, are rising. Just last week, for the first time in a long time, mortgage rates exceeded 5%. I hope you all locked in at 4% or something lower. But now mortgage rates are 5%. It's going to be very, very difficult for people to buy houses now because, like everything else, house prices are rising. And now mortgage rates are rising. So it's going to be difficult to get into a house because it's going to require a larger down payment because you're going to have to pay more for the house. And secondly, the mortgage payments are going to be higher because of the rising mortgage rates. So that might eventually put a kibosh on these rapidly rising house prices, and it might create a bit of a recession in the construction industry. Now, the construction industry is a very important industry in the economy, and if that suffers, then, look out. This is what happened in 2009 when the bubble, the speculative bubble in housing burst. And this led to what was called eventually the Great Recession. I believe we covered this when we talked about the history of the business cycle. So as long as inflation continues to surge, interest rates will continue to climb for two reasons. One is because of that cost of inflation block in the nominal interest rate stack. Now, if you'll go back to module 4, where we talked about the money market, we talked about what are the factors that go into determining interest rates. And at the bottom block, as you may remember, was the cost of inventory. Bankers call that the cost of funds. As you know, a bank is nothing more than a middleman. And what makes a middleman so good at middlemaning? He keeps an inventory. And for the financial intermediary, that is the bank or the credit union or whatever it is we're talking about, the inventory is money. Where do they get the money? They get the money from savers, depositors. That's where they get the money. And so how does a bank motivate a household or a business to deposit money into their institution? Well, by paying them. And that's the cost of the bank acquiring its inventory. The second block was the cost of operations. The third, was the cost of shoplifting. Of course, they don't call it shoplifting. Anybody remember the word we used? The third block in that nominal interest rate stack? Anybody remember that?
What does it start with? Can you give us a hint on what it
Mark,
starts
I see
with?
you turned off your mute button. Oh, maybe I can't hear you. Okay.
Yeah, no, I was saying, what does it start with? I remember it. Can you give us a hint on what it starts with?
I'm sorry. I had unintentionally turned down your volume. Will you start from the beginning, please?
Oh, I got you. I was saying that I kind of remember a little bit. I was saying, can you give us a hint on what it starts with?
What starts with?
That word it's when people steal.
Starts with a D.
It's I know exactly what it is. It's when people steal, but it's so they have to raise the prices so other people can make up for it.
They have to raise prices so other people can make up for it, but it's not stealing, it's failing to pay back the loan in this case.
A default.
Default is correct. So that is the third block. Now, the fourth block in that nominal interest rate stack is the cost of inflation. Lenders know that if there is inflation, then the purchasing power value of the dollars that the borrower will pay back to him will diminish while the borrower is holding the money. Meaning inflation is going to eat into the purchasing power value of the dollars that are paid back to him. And so what the lender does is to build in a buffer to the interest rate that he charges the borrower, build in a buffer to let inflation eat away at that. The higher the expected rate of inflation, the higher will be the buffer, and therefore the higher the interest rate the borrower will pay. Now, that's one reason why nominal interest rates are up and will likely continue to climb: inflation. But there's a second reason. And as you can see here, that second reason is as a result of the policies of the Fed. Now, what the heck is the Fed? The Fed is the affectionate nickname for the Federal Reserve System, which is the branch of government that conducts monetary policy, which we're going to start talking about tonight. So here we have covered the current state of the economy. We haven't talked about monetary policy, but we have talked a little bit about fiscal policy. Now, before we go on to monetary policy, let's do the following. I talked about this last time. I told you that you are going to be required to compute the height of the public debt if we stack up dollars one on top of the other. Not end to end. I'm talking about flat side to flat side, not end to end. We stack them up like right here. Okay. Now, a dollar is $1 is 0.0043 of an inch thick. There's a dollar. A stack of $100 bills is going to be about a half an inch, 0.43 inches thick. A stack of $1,000, of course, is going to be about 4.3 inches. About a little taller than a business envelope. A stack of $100,000 is going to be about 36 feet high, about as high as a 3-story office building. Now, the Empire State Building is 1,250 feet high. The stack of $1 million is going to be about as high as a 10-story office building. A stack of $1 billion, I don't know why I showed you the Empire State Building. A stack of $1 billion is going to be about 2/3 of a mile high. 2/3 of a mile high. A stack of $1 billion. A stack of $1 trillion. A trillion is 1,000 billion. Is going to be, let's go to previous. A stack of $1 billion is going to be about 2/3 of a mile high. 1,000 2/3 of a mile high. $1 trillion then is going to be about 67,000 miles high. $1 trillion, 67,000 miles high. That's not quite 3 times around the earth. A stack of $3.5 trillion, which was about last year's deficit, would be about 237,532 miles, about the distance, the average distance from the Earth to the moon. The height of a stack of 30 billion $1 bills. Okay. Now, let me go to the, oops, previous. We're looking for a height of a stack of $1 trillion. Actually, we're looking for the height of a stack of $30 trillion. How high? Anybody have any guesses how high a stack of $30 trillion is? Okay. A $1 bill, as I mentioned, is 0.0043 inches thick. A stack of $100 bills, move that decimal place over 2 places, about a half an inch thick, 0.43 inches thick. A stack of 10,000, which is another 100, 10, 100, 10, 100, about 43 inches thick, a little over a yard, maybe 4 feet, something like that. 3.5 feet. 3.5 feet. A stack of $100,000 bills is 430 inches thick, which is about 36 feet high. A stack of $1 million bills is about 4,300 inches thick, which is about 360 feet high. Notice that 100,000, all I did is multiply it by 10. 100,000 was 36 feet high. A million was 360. Now, a billion is 1,000 million. So a billion, that's a billion right there, is going to be about 360,000 feet high, which is about 68 miles. A stack of a trillion, which is 1,000 billion, then is going to be about 68,000 miles high, not quite 3 times around the earth. Now get ready for it. Our public debt is $30 trillion. How high will $30 trillion be? A stack of $30 trillion is going to be 2,040,000 miles high. 2 million miles high. That's unbelievable. Now, if you don't believe that, go back and look at the math and do it yourself if you would like. I can't even envision 2 million miles high. But there you go. Wow. Okay. So let's now start talking about monetary policy. Monetary policy is the third way in which the government can manipulate the level of economic activity. The one way, of course, would be supply side policy. That's shifting around the aggregate supply curve. Now, this is desirable because when you shift the aggregate supply curve to the right, you fight inflation and unemployment simultaneously. Now, if you shift it to the left, look out. You are in trouble because you're going to get both higher inflation, higher unemployment, stagflation, a place where we may be headed to right now in our economy. So let's don't even think about that. Let's think about shifting it to the right. Get inflation down, get output up, get unemployment down. That's what's desirable. Now, the other side of that is shifting the aggregate demand curve to the right or to the left, depending on whether you want to fight inflation or unemployment. And I say that because when you shift the aggregate demand curve, when you fight one undesirable macroeconomic phenomenon, you make the other one worse off. Envision in your mind's eye the aggregate demand curve shifting to the right. Well, this is good because it increases output and reduces unemployment, but it also increases the price level. Or if you want to fight inflation, you can shift the aggregate demand curve to the left. Shift the aggregate demand curve to the left, price level goes down, but so does output. And as a result, unemployment goes up. So with aggregate demand, you fight one or the other and make the other one worse off in doing so. Use aggregate supply, you make them both better off as long as the aggregate supply curve is shifting to the right. Make it shift to the left, you're worse off. In the worst of all worlds. Now, one way in which we can shift that aggregate demand curve around is through fiscal policy. Fiscal policy. Now, you all know about fiscal policy and what that's all about. Government taxing and spending. If the government spends more than it taxes, it's going to shift that aggregate demand curve to the right through a budgetary deficit. If it taxes more than it spends, it's going to shift that aggregate demand curve to the left and produce a budgetary surplus. Fiscal policy. But there's a second leg of that demand management policy, policies that smooth out the business cycle by shifting the aggregate demand curve around, and that is monetary policy. Now, monetary policy is pretty much all we have left in terms of macroeconomic management, because fiscal policy, just forget about that. What fiscal policy has turned into being is a bunch of self-serving politicians all trying to get reelected by having government spending flowing into their constituency, more government spending flowing in than comes out through taxes. And they can get their pork barrel project passed by promising to vote for the other guy's pork barrel project. Everybody gets their project passed. Nobody has to pay for it. We'll just put it on the plastic. So that's why we get recurring deficit. I don't know where all of this is going. I don't know where it's going to be in 10, 15 years. You know, I'm glad I'm an old man. I'm going to die soon. I won't even have to look at that. Thank God. But you will. You're going to have to deal with it. I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe, I don't know. I don't even know. Fortunately, I don't have to worry about it. Anyway, so the other side of that demand management policy is monetary policy. Monetary policy is also used to manipulate that aggregate demand curve and shift it to the right when we want to fight unemployment, shift it to the left when we want to fight inflation. So let's talk now, let's begin our discussion of monetary policy. So there we are. Monetary policy. How would we define monetary policy? Monetary policy is changing the supply of loanable funds in the vaults of commercial banks to affect interest rates. Now envision a commercial bank and recall what a commercial bank is. A commercial bank is nothing more than a middleman. A middleman is a guy that lines up buyers and sellers. Who does the commercial bank line up? The commercial bank lines up lenders and borrowers. Lenders are people with an excess or surplus of cash. They don't need all the cash right now. They got more than they need for the moment. And rather than stuff it in a mattress or a pillowcase, they want to put it to work. And they can put it to work by loaning it out. By loaning it out, the lender is providing a service to the borrower, a service for which the borrower is willing to pay. Now, the service that he provides is allowing the borrower to have something now rather than making him wait. And the amount that the borrower is willing to pay is called interest. The interest rate that a bank charges a customer, a borrower, is going to be determined by supply and demand. If the supply goes down, ceteris paribus, the price of money goes up. If the supply of loanable funds, that's that money that's sloshing around the bank vault, that the bank vault uses as its inventory, and then remember, the inventory is what makes the middleman such a good middleman. If the amount of money sloshing around that bank vault goes down, the price of it, the interest rate is going to rise. If the supply of it goes up, the interest rate will go down. That's essentially the essence of monetary policy. You change the amount of money sloshing around in those bank vaults, that will change interest rates. If interest rates go down, there will be more spending. The aggregate demand curve will shift to the right. If interest rates go up, there will be less spending, ceteris paribus, of course, and the aggregate demand curve will shift to the left. So that's pretty much what monetary policy is all about. And so in our discussion of monetary policy, we are going to ask the question, what is money? I mean, we're talking about monetary policy. We at least ought to know what the hell money is, you know? Can you define it?
Anything that could be used as a means of currency, like, or like anything that is valuable?
Well, yeah, there are a couple of other characteristics that money must have, and that's what we will talk about. There's a famous line from a Supreme Court justice one time when they were talking about the legality of selling pornography. And the Supreme Court justice, I forgot what his name was, he said, we have a problem here. I know porn when I see it, but I can't define it. Same with money. It's the same with money. You know it when you see it, but you can't define it. What is the line that separates porn from non-porn? What is the line that separates money from non-money? We'll see what that is in just a minute. Once we figure out that, we'll look and see what it is that makes up the money supply in the United States. What makes up the money supply in the US? What are the assets that make up the money supply? Next, we'll talk about how is the money supply changed? Does the government fly helicopters over the people and start dumping out bales of money into the land? Is that how they increase the money supply? Well, of course not. Well, if that's not the case, how do they do it? How is the money supply changed? Then who is responsible for changing the money supply? And this is where the Fed comes in. Who is responsible for changing the money supply? And finally, how does a change in the money supply affect interest rates? How does a change in the money supply affect interest rates? So that's what we have on the program. So let's start with what is money? The question, what is money? Well, you know it when you see it, but can you define it? Interestingly enough, money is defined in terms of the functions that it performs. In other words, money is what money does. Money is defined in terms of the functions that it performs. So, Mark, you are correct. If something performs the functions of money, then it is money. It doesn't have to have Abe Lincoln or George Washington or Benjamin Franklin's picture on it. Anything that performs the functions of money is money. Now, if that's not glib enough for you, money is what money does, let me just add this. Why do people accept money? Money is accepted because it is accepted. Now, what kind of a thing is that for a teacher to say? That's sort of a tautology.
Actually,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Mark.
No, I was gonna say, like, I think that is very interesting because, like, if you really think about it, we take money, US, the United States dollar, just a tiny piece of paper, and we add value to a piece of paper that can be ripped, be burned. Like, it's really nothing, but we all add value to it. And it's just, it's always been interesting to me that a piece of paper is valuable.
Well, first of all, it's not paper. It's a combination of cotton and linen.
Right. That's right. Yep.
Despite the fact that we call it paper money. But anyway, so you are correct. It has no intrinsic value. The intrinsic value is the value of the materials out of which it is made. Now, gold, that can be used as money, and that has intrinsic value. You know, a beaver pelt, that was once used as money. Tobacco leaves, back when the United States was just the colonies of England, the American government, such that it was, couldn't print up money. And I mean, they printed up something, they were called continentals, but the British, when we bought something from them, I say we, I wasn't alive at the time, almost, but when people in the colonies bought something from England, that people in England wouldn't accept that crap that the American government was printing up. They only thing they would accept was leaves of tobacco.
Gotcha.
Leaves of tobacco. Now, the problem is Sir Walter Raleigh got all them people over in Europe hooked on nicotine. So, you know, and America could grow a hell of a lot of tobacco. So they accepted tobacco as money. And, and that's because tobacco had intrinsic value. It had value in and of itself. But a dollar bill has no intrinsic value, a little bit of cotton, a little bit of linen. $1 million bill, which is worth 1,000,000 times a $1 bill, has the same amount of cotton and linen in it.
Right.
Why
exactly.
do people accept it in exchange for goods and services that have value? I'll tell you why. Because they are confident that somebody's going to accept it off of them.
Got you. That makes sense.
If they ever begin to doubt that somebody will accept it off of them, they'll stop accepting it off of you. They don't want to be left holding a worthless bag of linen and cotton. So money is what money does, and money is accepted because it is accepted. I hope this is starting to make sense. Even I'm starting to understand it. All right. Now here's the explanation. I don't know what's going on here. I accept money rather than goods in exchange for goods and service because I am confident that the money that I accept from you will be accepted from me. That's why I accept your money. And if I am ever doubtful that it will be accepted from me, I will not accept it from you. What does money is due? I think I wrote this lecture when I was drunk. What does money do?
And Professor, you also have to hit the save at the top left too, because it's not gonna, when you go back into it. Yeah. Okay.
What does money do? All right, so here are the functions of money. We said money is defined in terms of the functions that it performs. Anything that performs the functions of money is by definition money. I'll tell you what, let's do. Let's take a quick break. Let's take a 10-minute break here before we get into the functions of money. When we come back, we'll begin talking about the functions of money. Okay? So let's take a little break here. It is now, let's see, what time is it? I have 11:06. Let's come, I'm sorry, 7:06. Let's come back at about 7:16 or so. Okay? All right. We'll see you guys in just a little while. 10 minutes. Okay, are we back? Anybody have any questions or comments so far? Okay. Is everybody asleep? I'm hoping this is interesting for you. Anyway. So here's where we are. Let me make sure that you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to be going on for an hour and 15 minutes and nobody can hear. So anyway, here's where we are. The first question that we're going to ask is, what is money? What is money? That's the first thing we're asking. And what we find is that money is what money does. That means that anything that performs the functions of money is money. Anything that performs the functions. So let's consider, what are the functions of money? What does money do? I think most importantly, money acts as a medium of exchange. A medium of exchange. That means it overcomes the encumbrances of barter. Overcomes the encumbrances of barter. Now, you may remember the definition of barter. Barter means trading goods for goods. Well, what are the encumbrances of barter? Trading goods for goods requires a double coincidence. a double coincidence. That means that if you're trading goods for goods, the first coincidence that must be made is that the buyer must find a seller who has what he wants. If I want to go someplace and buy a bottle of wine, I must first find somebody who has wine for sale. Well, that's not very difficult. You could drop me on any street corner in random here in Prince George's County, and I'd be in front of a store that sold wine, so that wouldn't be a big deal. But the second coincidence that must be made is that the seller of wine must be willing to accept what I have to offer in trade. That's the second coincidence that must be made. So barter requires a double coincidence. Now, in a very simple economy, this might not be too difficult to make. But in a highly complex economy, where there's a high degree of specialization, it would be very, very difficult. And a high degree of specialization would not be possible were it not for money, because here's what money does. In acting as a medium of exchange, it does so by reducing the number of coincidences necessary to make a trade from 2 to 1. Now we only need one coincidence, not a double coincidence. The coincidence we need is that the buyer must find a seller who has what he wants, because if everybody accepts the money, he automatically has what the seller wants, money. So that's how money overcomes the encumbrances of barter. It reduces the number of coincidences necessary to make a trade from 2 to 1, which makes it infinitely more convenient. Now, a second function of money, it must serve as a unit of account. What the heck does that mean? That means that prices, you must be able to express prices in terms of money. So whatever the money is, whatever we use as money, it must be countable, and it must also be easy to make change. For example, would a chair be a good unit of money? Let's suppose that you had a widget to trade for me, and that the equilibrium price of a widget was 3.5 chairs. Now, if we're trading goods for goods, the prices must be expressed in terms of everything that the seller must be willing to accept. And suppose then that this particular widget, the seller is willing to accept 3.5 chairs in exchange. But is he really going to accept a half a chair? Can you make change? Can you give him 4 chairs and he's going to give you back a half a chair? What the heck would you do with a half a chair? You know, you'd break your butt is what you do. So a chair would not serve as a good unit of account because you couldn't make change. You can express, you can count them, express prices in them, but you can't make change. So the chair wouldn't be a good unit of account. And thirdly, money must act as a store of wealth, a store of wealth. That means that the purchasing power value of the asset that is used as money will not depreciate quickly due to, say, physical deterioration. Suppose that I wanted to buy a widget from you and I had milk to exchange. And you said, okay, I'll accept 10 gallons of milk for this widget. I get the widget, I give you 10 gallons of milk. You better spend that milk pretty damn quickly because it's going to go sour in a few days and nobody would accept it. So milk is not a good store of wealth. The money you accept must be willing to hold its wealth over time. Now, even $1, that's typically what we use for money, that's not a perfect store of wealth. As a matter of fact, this year it's going to lose about 8.5% of its wealth, of its purchasing power. It's going to deteriorate. Now, where did I get that number, 8.5%? Why is it going to lose 8.5% of its value? Where'd that 8.5% come from?
Is it like inflation?
That's
Inflation?
inflation. That's correct.
Yes.
So even $1 is not a perfect store of wealth, but at least it doesn't lose its value as quickly as does, say, milk. So this is what money does. It acts as a medium of exchange, a unit of account, and a store of wealth. Now, it doesn't take dollars to do that. Anything that will perform these three functions is considered money. Now, gold would be a better form of money than would, say, milk. Okay. So those are the characteristic features. Anything that performs these three functions is money. So let's ask the question, why does society use money? Why does the society use money? As I mentioned before, barter requires a double coincidence. The double coincidence is that the buyer must find a seller who has what he wants, and the seller must be willing to accept what the buyer has to trade. Now, if everybody accepts the money, this issue is resolved because the buyer automatically has what the seller wants, money. So money reduces the number of coincidences necessary to make a trade from 2 to 1. Now let's just, for sake of interest, let's look at early forms of money. As I mentioned to you, oftentimes, particularly in trading with England, American colonists had to use tobacco leaves to buy manufactured goods from England. Tobacco leaves had intrinsic value. That means it had value in and of itself, not just as money, but it had money in and of itself. Beaver pelts were also used as money. Beaver pelts had intrinsic value. You could cut them up and make a coat out of them or a blanket or something like that. Seeds, obviously, and gold. Now, why has gold been accepted as money? Well, obviously, because its bright and shiny appearance, plus the fact that it is an element and won't rust, corrode, evaporate. That makes gold an excellent material for jewelry. And this is what gives gold its intrinsic value. So tobacco leaves, beaver pelt, seeds, gold, they all had intrinsic value. They had value in and of itself. Besides having a monetary value, besides having an exchange value, they had a use value. All of these things. And it was their use value that gave them their exchange value. Oops, we've been there. Now, what is it that makes up the money supply in the U.S.? We don't use beaver pelts and leaves of tobacco anymore. So, what is it that gives? What are the assets that we use as money in the United States? Well, there are a couple of definitions of money, as you will see. We will use the narrowest definition. The narrowest definition has the least number of assets in it. As we define money more liberally, we'll start adding assets to it. But the narrowest definition of money, the definition that contains the fewest number of assets, is called M1. And a basic component of M1 is coins. Coins. Dimes, nickels, quarters, pennies, etc. I know you know what a coin is. I apologize for that. I hope I didn't insult your intelligence. Now, coins are called token money. Token money. Why? Because their intrinsic value is less than their exchange value. They are called token money because their intrinsic value, once again, their intrinsic value is the value of the materials out of which it is made. That intrinsic value is less than their exchange value. What this means is that there is less than 10 cents worth of material in a dime. There is less than 25 cents worth of material in a quarter. There is less than 5 cents worth of material in a nickel. They are only tokens. They only represent value. They don't really have much value themselves. They're just tokens. Now, the government mints coins where the intrinsic value is less than the exchange value for a good reason. It is so that Gresham's law will not occur. We don't want Gresham's law occurring. And Gresham's law will occur if the exchange value is equal to or greater than the intrinsic value. So we don't want that. So that's why we make the intrinsic value less than the exchange value. So Gresham's law will not occur. What is Gresham's law? Gresham's law is this: bad money always drives out good money. Bad money always drives out good money. Now, what the heck does that mean? About 30 years ago, I went to an estate auction. For some reason, I just had a wild hair. I went to an estate auction. And just to see what they had to sell, see if I could find something interesting. And most of it was a bunch of crap. But after a while, the auctioneer comes out with this, I forgot what format it was in, but it was a bunch of old Roman coins. And I just, oh my God, I had a fit. I said, that is the coolest thing I've ever seen. These things are 2,000 years old. You know, maybe Jesus handled one of these coins. Who the heck knows? They're 2,000 years old. They've got a picture of the dictator. What the hell am I trying? What word am I trying to use here? Carved into them. Oh, it's incredible. Look at these. And I said, they must be worth a mint. Holy mackerel. And so I started bidding on them. As it turns out, somebody in the room started bidding, and he and I got into a bidding war. Each one of us wanted it. And I was determined not to lose it. I wanted these things. So, you know, the bidding war, the price got well up. I wound up winning. Yay for me. Turns out later, not too soon after that, not too long after that, I realized that I had way overpaid, which is typically what you do in an estate sale. I got real excited. I had no knowledge of the scarcity or the abundance of Roman coins. I just made a guess, coupled with the fact that I wanted to beat this guy, so I had my ego involved, coupled with the fact that I found them interesting, so I got excited about it, my curiosity, and all of these things worked against me. I way overpaid, but that's okay. But here's the thing. Here is the these old Roman coins didn't look like this. They look like this. They all had little chips out of them like that. See that little notch right there, that little chip. There's a chip, there's a chip. There's a flat side right there. Somebody clipped that thing. That's what these Roman coins look like. They didn't look like these. This is good money. It looks perfect. They were stamped. You can see they're not perfectly round. They were stamped by some sort of a thing. This is bronze. What do you suppose happened here? Well, let me tell you what happened here. Gresham's law happened. These two coins started out looking like this. But after they pass through enough hands, they start looking like this. Not because they're depreciating or deteriorating, or not because of the physical wear and tear. That's not what causes them to look like that. What happens is people take this coin right here and clip out just a little tiny piece right there, almost imperceptible. And then they pass it on as though it is a perfectly good coin. And then the next time they get a coin, they take another little notch out of it right there and pass it on as it's a perfectly good coin. They probably put their thumb over that so you can't see. Now, once enough coins passes through this person's hands, he's going to have a pile of these little tiny little specks of silver or bronze or whatever it is. And what's he going to do? He's going to, bunch it up into a ball, melt it down. He's got a nice piece of silver or bronze or whatever metal that is. Money for nothing. You can see how he'd be motivated to clip or shave or somehow otherwise extract the intrinsic value out of this coin and make it do the work that a perfectly good coin would do. After World War II, there was a journal article, an academic journal article written by an economist who during World War II was a bomber pilot. And his plane was shot down while bombing Germany. Well, he survived and he was taken to a prisoner of war camp. Now, this isn't the concentration camps. This is a prisoner of war camp. Now, the concentration camp, hypothetically, nobody knew about those. This is where they exterminated 6 million Jews during World War II. That's not what I'm talking about. In the prisoner of war camp, this is where they kept the soldiers and the pilots and everything from the opposing country. Now, there were international agreements on how you treat prisoners of war. And one of the agreements was that if you're holding prisoners of war, you must allow them to receive a care package every once in a while. Now, CARE, I don't know if there's that charitable organization still exists, but CARE was a charitable organization that would, collect donations, buy socks and all of these things that the prisoners would need and send them all in a care package. And the prisoners would open the care package. They'd see some clean socks. They see some underwear. They see some T-shirts. They see some powdered eggs. They'd see some powdered milk. They have marmalade and a bunch of other goodies, maybe some razor blades or something like that. And one thing that the care packages always had was cigarettes, because back in those days, in World War II, everybody smoked. Everybody. Because nobody knew what damage smoke would do to your body. Smoking was fun and looked glamorous, and everybody smoked. And so the cigarettes were always included in the care packages. Now, some people who received the care packages didn't like the marmalade. Some didn't like the powdered eggs. Some didn't like the powdered milk. Some did like the marmalade. Some did like this and that, whatever it is. So there was a lot of trading going on in these prisoners of war camp, lots of trading. Well, they quickly realized that barter trade was a very inconvenient form of trade. Why? Because with barter trade, you needed a double coincidence. So they decided to overcome this encumbrance of barter by using a form of money. Now, what form of money do you suppose they used? Well, of course, cigarettes. Cigarettes were small, You didn't really need to make change because they were small enough where you didn't have to make change. And they had intrinsic value. You could smoke them. You couldn't just use them for exchange. You could smoke them if you wanted to. And so this form of money right here had exchange value. And what gave it its exchange value was its intrinsic value. That's why people were willing to accept them. Even if somebody didn't accept them in a trade, you could smoke them. But here's what somebody did. Some people started doing. They started taking these ready rolls. They call these ready rolls. These are machine rolled cigarettes. Oftentimes back in those days, people carried around cigarette papers and a little pouch of tobacco, and they'd roll their own. Well, these were machine rolled cigarettes. They were called ready rolls, and they received them in the care packages. Now these ready rolls were standardized, almost down to the last molecule. And so when you received a ready roll, you knew what you were receiving. So what somebody would do is take it back to their, locker or whatever it is, and pinch out just the tiniest little bit of tobacco, just a tiny little bit, so that nobody could tell. And then they would pass the cigarette on as though it were a perfectly good cigarette. Then the next guy who received the cigarette would do the same thing, pinch out just a tiny little bit of tobacco. Now you go through enough of these things, you're going to have a big pile of tobacco where you can roll your own. And then you have money for nothing. And eventually all of the tobacco is going to go out of these ready rolls here. So the ready rolls aren't even going to exist anymore until you get your next care package. And these things right here, these blunts, are going to take the place. Now these blunts aren't standardized. Some guys roll big ones, some guys roll skinny ones, some guys do a really beautiful job of doing it, some guys do a crappy job of doing it. So these are not standardized. This is bad money, and it has replaced good money. This is bad money, and it has replaced good money. And that's what happens when the intrinsic value of the money that you are using is equal to the exchange value. So what happens is that the government starts out with bad money. It starts out with money whose intrinsic value is way less than the exchange value. Have you ever been tempted to shave or clip a dime? Well, of course not. Why? You could shave and clip dimes all day long, and you still wouldn't get 10 cents worth of material out of it. Easier just to spend the dime. You get more value. So, by the way, dimes and quarters and half dollars, all of these high silver content coins, they have notches. If you look at the edges are notched. Now, and you can therefore see if somebody shaved or clipped it, because those notches would be gone. Now, nobody is going to shave or clip a dime. Nobody is going to be stupid enough to do that. Although I did read an article in the paper the other day where a guy stole about $300,000 worth of coins from this coin shop. He stole about $300,000 worth of antique coins, and he put them in a coin machine and got about $30 for it. That sounds like something I would do. But anyway, so nobody's going to bother shaving or clipping a dime. But why do they put notches on the side? Just out of, this is just the traditional way of making a coin. They used to do that, but they don't do that anymore. I mean, nobody's going to shave or clip it. They used to do that to prevent people from shaving or clipping. But nowadays, they start out with bad money. There's nowhere near the intrinsic value in a coin that's equal to the exchange value. Nowhere close. Now, paper currency, that's another form of money. Now, paper currency is called fiat money. Look at that term, fiat money. The term fiat money means by government edict, by government proclamation. That's fiat. That's the government fiat, a proclamation that declares this or that, whatever it is. Now, you see this dollar right here? This dollar has even less intrinsic value than a coin. Just a little bit of cotton, a little bit of linen. You'd have to have a mountain of dollars to have enough cotton and linen to trade for anything of value. This has virtually no intrinsic value at all, but it's got a dollar's worth of exchange value. And if this had a bunch of other zeros following behind it, it would have much more exchange value, but still no intrinsic value. Why then do people accept dollars, just like Mark was asking a few minutes ago? Why do they accept these intrinsically worthless pieces of paper in exchange for something that's worth $1 or $10 or $100 or $1,000, whatever it is? Why do they do that? It is because they know that it's going to be accepted off of them. And how do they know that it's going to be accepted off of them? They know that it's going to be accepted off of them because this money right here is legal tender. Legal tender. Tender. Legal tender. Now, what does that mean? That means this. If you charge me $1 for a widget, if I offer you this $1 bill, which is legal tender, if I offer this or tender it, which means offer it to you, if I tender this to you, you must accept it. You cannot say, oh no, I'm holding out for beaver pelts. Or, oh no, I'm holding out for leaves of tobacco. Or I'm holding out for cigarettes. You must accept this government issued dollar bill. Why must you? Because it's legal tender. That's the law. And here's the law written right on the money. You can't see it here, but it says, I'm sure you know what it says. This note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. That means if you tender or offer this asset to someone in the correct amount, they must accept it as money. That's by government proclamation, by government fiat. And that's why they call this intrinsically worthless piece of paper fiat money. It's the government proclamation that says you must accept it. And if I'm pretty sure that you're going to accept it, if I'm confident that the government can enforce its laws, the law that you must accept it, then I'm confident that you're going to accept it off of me, and therefore I will accept it off of someone else. So it's this government proclamation that makes this note legal tender, that makes these dollars acceptable.
Hey, Professor, can I say something really quick?
Sure.
I actually saw on like YouTube a really funny story about that. It was a guy that had parking tickets or some type of tickets, and say for example it was $100 worth of tickets that he had to pay.
Parking tickets or something like that.
Yeah, I think he had to pay something, and it was like some type of tickets, and it was like $100 worth of tickets. Uh-huh. And he paid. He went to the place to play them, and he paid them in like it was like all quarters or like all pennies or something like that. They was forced to take it because it's legal tender, even though it was like $100 worth of in pennies that he paid.
Interestingly enough, a penny is not legal tender.
Really? He did it in change. I know he did it in change.
Yeah, he might have done it in change. But yeah, I saw a guy who I saw a news report where a guy made his last alimony payment to his ex-wife in change.
True. Yep. It's like, so I just thought it was like really funny, and they had to take it. It was like, and he and you know what? It was really wrong. Like he should, I mean, I'm not gonna say it was wrong, but he was just really, he was really mean about it. He had him in a bag, and he like dumped the whole bag out on the counter. He was like, I have given you your money, and I'm taking my bag because this is my bag. Right. And it was like the proper amount, but it was like quarters or something. I just found it. I mean, now that you're saying this, it makes sense.
I honestly think that there is some exception to this legal tender business where you can't do that. You can't pile a bunch of
quarters
change on somebody just to be mean. I think
right.
I'm not a lawyer, but I think there's some sort of an exception to that rule that prevents that sort of thing from happening. Because if I did that, I'd do that to everybody.
I know, but I mean, he made it's a good. I hear what you're saying. It's a good argument though. Like, I mean, if it's $100 and he paid it in quarters, he made his payment.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's It's illegal tender. I guess
Yeah.
you know what? I guess if it was a $1 bill and it was $1,000 and he paid it in all ones, you know,
Right,
then it probably will be accepted.
right.
I saw that before, and I just now that you're saying this and teaching this, I just thought it was funny.
Yeah, that is. But the thing is, the penny is an exception. A penny is not legal tender.
Got you. What about the other? Is quarter? Is there the are the other coins legal tender, or is it just the dollar bills?
Well, no, these coins are legal tender as well.
It's not the
I didn't
penny.
use the term legal tender because I wanted to highlight the term token money. But
Gotcha.
yeah, the coins are legal tender as well.
Got you.
So,
Except for
but
the
this
penny.
has no intrinsic value whatsoever. So this fiat money is money that you must accept because it's backed by the United States government, backed in the way that in the form it says the government says you must accept it as money. Now, if you don't accept it as money, that doesn't mean you're going to go to jail. If you say, no, I'm holding out for beaver pelts, that doesn't mean you're going to jail. But what it means is that if somebody has taken delivery of the merchandise and has offered you this dollar, or however many dollars he's supposed to pay you, and you refuse, then you cannot sue him for non-payment because he tendered to you the correct amount of this government issued money. And moreover, when you do finally get around to accepting it, he cannot sue you for interest on a delayed payment or penalty. So people must accept this. Now, here's what happens. As soon as a government starts to totter or teeter or whatever it is, if people start losing confidence in the government, in their government, if people start losing confidence in their government's ability to enforce their law, particularly the law that says you must accept this money, the first thing that happens is people stop accepting the nation's currency. If they feel that the government is going to be toppled in some way, the first thing that happens is that they stop accepting the currency. They accept something else. They accept gold, they accept beaver pelts, they accept cigarettes, whatever it is, or mostly they accept dollars. But they're not going to accept the nation's domestic currency. What do you suppose is the exchange value of an Iraqi, what the hell do they call those things? The Iraqi note with Saddam Hussein's picture on it. That has no exchange value whatsoever because Saddam Hussein's government is not there to enforce the law that says you must accept this as money. So this thing right here is called fiat money, has no intrinsic value at all. You know, the only thing that gives it value is the fact that the government says you must accept it. You must accept it. Now, I might also add that you cannot take this note to the United States Treasury and exchange it for gold or silver or anything else. They'll laugh in your face. It has exchange value because the government says it has exchange value. So this is fiat money. So coins, which is token money, paper currency, fiat money. Now a third member of the M1 family money is something called demand deposits. Demand deposits. Now, what are demand deposits? This is also money. Demand deposits are simply checks. A check is a demand deposit. A checking account is a demand deposit, a checking account. Now, I know you know what a check is, so don't feel that I am insulting your intelligence by reviewing the concept of a check. Okay? A check is simply a set of instructions, And what it says is take this amount right here, take it out of my account, take it out of my pile, and hand it to this guy, or put it in this guy's pile. This guy right here, put it in his pile. Either hand him the money or put it in his pile. That's the instruction that you're giving the bank. So a check is a set of instructions. Now, a check is considered money because it is often, although not always, accepted as money. Merchants want to make your purchase of their product or service as convenient for you as possible. And so they will oftentimes accept this, your check. Now, this right here is the equivalent of a $100 bill. Now, it is not legal tender. The government is not saying that you have to accept this. As a matter of fact, there are merchants that will not accept my checks. I look like a pretty shady character, so they're not going to accept my check. They think that it might not be worth the amount of money it says. They figure that it might bounce. They're not going to accept, and they don't have to because it's not legal tender. It's bank issued money. It's not government issued money. But since it is not government issued money, it is not legal tender. The merchant doesn't have to accept it. But what makes it acceptable? What makes it acceptable is the fact that it is backed by something. Now, the paper currency is backed by nothing other than your confidence in the government's ability to enforce the law. What law am I talking about? The law that says you have to accept it. There is no such law that says you have to accept a check. And therefore, the check must be backed by something of value. And what is it backed by? This check right here is backed by government issued money. This bank issued money is backed by government issued money. It says that if you take this set of instructions to the bank and you hand it to them, they will hand you $100 of legal tender government issued money in exchange for this. The government issued money is not backed by a physical asset. It's backed by confidence in the government's ability to enforce its laws, the law that says you must accept it. This bank issued money is made acceptable by the fact that it is backed by something. It is backed by government issued money. You can take this set of instructions right here to the bank and exchange it for government issued money. Now, the definition of money M2 consists of a couple of less liquid assets. So let's review what makes up M1. M1 is made up of coins, paper currency, and demand deposits. Now you will find out next time why they use the term demand deposits. Okay, well, I'll give you a hint right now. You take this check, somebody writes you a check, and you can take it to the bank and on demand exchange that for $100 worth of government issued money. Now you don't have to pound your fists on the table or anything like that. You can be polite, but you on demand, you can exchange that for government issued money. That's why it's called a demand deposit. But let's look at the definition of money called M2. M2 is a more liberal definition of money, and it consists of assets that are less liquid. Now, M2 consists, of course, of coins, paper currency, and checks, but M2 also consists of less liquid assets. Now, this is a perfectly liquid asset. The term liquidity refers to the degree to which an asset can be quickly, conveniently, and costlessly converted into another asset. Quickly, conveniently, and costlessly converted into another asset. You see that note right there? I can quickly, conveniently, and costlessly convert this into a bottle of wine or into a restaurant meal, something like that. It doesn't require any negotiation. They accept it because it's accepted. So this thing right here, that note, that legal tender note, is perfectly liquid. But there are some assets that are less liquid. That's where it says legal tender. Here's a less liquid asset. Why is that used toothbrush less liquid than that $100 government issued bill, because I'm going to have a difficult time finding somebody who would accept that in exchange. So it's not going to be very quick. It's not going to be very convenient. So this is a less liquid. As a matter of fact, I would call it an illiquid asset. I'm betting nobody would accept it. Only a pervert would accept it in exchange for a good or service. So M2 consists of less liquid assets. Now, what are the less liquid assets that are included in the definition M2? They are savings accounts, money market accounts, and money market mutual funds. Now, so let's look at the difference between a checking account, a savings account, and a money market account. And what you're going to find is that a savings account and a money market account are less liquid than a checking account. When you have a checking account, you can go and get that money out on demand. All you have to do is write a check to cash or write it to yourself, present it to the teller, and tell the teller, I demand that you hand me $100 worth of government issued money for this bank issued money that I am handing you. And that teller's going to do it. That's what makes that check highly liquid. A savings account is a little bit different, though. A savings account is treated differently. When you deposit money in a savings account, they take that money and lend it out, the bank does. And they lend it out for longer periods of time because there are restrictions on that savings account. You do not have full, complete, 100% access to your savings account like you do a checking account. If I have a checking account worth $1 million, I can write a check for $1 million, present it to the teller, and that teller will go back and within a minute or so, come back with $1 million worth of cash. If I have $1 million worth of money in my savings account, though, I cannot go up to the teller and say, yes, I'd like to withdraw $1 million from my savings account. Teller won't let you do that. They're going to say, look, you got to give us a couple of days to come up with that $1 million. So like a checking account is called a demand deposit account, a savings account is called a time deposit account. They invest the money in different ways. They invest it in longer term assets. And so they're not going to have $1 million in cash sitting around for you like they would in your checking account. That $1 million you have in your savings account, they've loaned it out at a higher price. That's their inventory. They're loaning that out. And so you've got to give them some time. And because you've got to give them some time to come up with the money to pay you, then the savings account is not as liquid as the checking account. Now, what about money market accounts? Oh, by the way, I might just say, when I do online banking with Bank of America, I can switch money from my savings to my checking immediately, and nobody's giving me any crap about that. I've never gotten a phone call say, hey, what's going on here? Never, not once. Why do you suppose that is? Can anybody guess? That is because I have such a little tiny tawdry amount of money in my savings account that, that's not going to put a dent in their inventory at all. They got that on hand easy. I want to take even $10,000 out of my savings account, transfer it to my checking, done like that, not a problem. If I want to do $1 million, that's another issue. Now, if I wanted to take $1 million out of my checking account, I could do it right there on the spot. Couldn't do it out of my savings account. Now, a money market account is like a savings account. It's a kind of a savings account.
Oh, Professor, can I ask a quick question?
Please, yes, go ahead.
I was wondering if, I'm not sure if you know the exact number, but Can they loan your money out? I think it's at 10 times for like every like dollar you
We'll
lend
talk
out.
about that. Well, we will talk about that when we talk about the fractional reserve system. That's not tonight. We'll
Got
talk
you.
about that next time.
Okay. Would you consider like doesn't it seem like it's a Ponzi scheme in a way for banks because they don't have all of the money and they
Yeah,
only work off of money that they're given? So it's like, isn't it like a Ponzi scheme?
a little bit, little bit.
Got you. Got you. Okay.
Yep. But the thing that even though you know it's a bit of a Ponzi scheme, and I know that it's a bit of a Ponzi scheme, we have confidence and we're going to let it, we're not going to mess with it because we know that every time we go to the bank, there's going to be plenty enough for us. Now, I don't care about the next guy. But if I want to take my money out of there, there's always been plenty for me.
Right. Right.
And as long as they keep doing that, I'm fine with it. Now,
Right.
this is called the fractional reserve system. And you will see why we use this Ponzi scheme, why it's necessary to use this Ponzi scheme in a capitalist economy. It's not really a Ponzi scheme, but it's, I get your point.
It's like similar traits to a Ponzi scheme, but it's not official.
It is a bit similar. We will see why this is a necessary form of banking, and it's called the fractional reserve system. Now, a money market account is less liquid than a checking account. Now, a money market account is a savings account that lets you write checks. You can write checks on this account. The problem is that if it drops down below a certain amount, then it reverts to a checking account and you don't get the higher interest that you would with, or you get no interest. That's what a money market account is. There is a bottom line, there is a floor, there is a minimum amount that you must have in that account. So anyway, you can access the money, but it's not very convenient. So this is the M2, the more broadly defined category of money, M2. That includes savings account and money market accounts. And of course, M2 would also include coins, paper currency, and demand deposits. So let's see, okay. Give me just a second here. All right. Now, let's talk about the banking system. The banking system. Okay. Now, imagine a tiny, isolated island somewhere in the South Pacific. Just an imaginary island. And, it's mostly this, lots of trees, lots of sand. The people who live there can easily get food from this lagoon right here, catch fish. They can get food from the trees, the coconuts, and whatever it is. It's a very easy, very laid back type of life. And then suddenly, someone gets a bright idea to open up a bank on this island. Now, this island has never seen a bank. Nobody on the island knows what a bank is, except for the guy that opened it up. So here's what he does. He constructs this little thatched house right here. Here's these are coconut leaves that form the roof. And here's a board, piece of driftwood or something washed up from an old wrecked ship 100 years ago. Piece of board right there. And he burns somehow the word, he takes his spear and heats the tip and burns the word bank into it. And he hangs out his shingle there. And so that's bank. Now, here, every once in a while, I don't know why, I lose this arrow here. I don't know what's going on. I mean, I can find it up here, but once I get down here. Anyway, so that bank, you can see the lobby where the tellers are, but what's that thing underneath? What is
That's
that?
where they store the money, like where
That's right.
the vault. The vault.
That's his vault. That's his vault. You are correct. That's his vault. That's where he's storing his inventory. Remember, he needs to keep an inventory in order to make himself a good middleman, because that's what he does. He lines up people with an excess of cash, brings them together with people with a shortage of cash. Now, let's consider this guy right here. We put a top hat on him to show that he's the guy. He has money. Now, how much money he has, I don't know. Let's say that he has $1,000 in his pocket, or whatever they call their currency. We'll just call it dollars. He has $1,000, and he's walking around that jungle with $1,000 in his pocket. Now, as you can imagine, this might be very, very dangerous. Somebody come along and mug his ass and take that $1,000 from him. He has no recourse whatsoever. So he might say, well, maybe I might do something with it, but I want it available to me when I want to spend it. And then he stumbles upon a bank. Wow, there's a bank. This might be very interesting for me. So he walks in, he looks around, says, what is this? The teller says, well, welcome to our bank. He says, well, what is a bank? And the teller starts explaining what a bank is. A bank is a middleman, brings together people with a surplus of cash, people with a shortage of cash, gives the person with a surplus of cash the opportunity to put it to work by providing someone else with a service. The service is having something now rather than making them wait, and it's a service for which the borrower is willing to pay, and the amount that the borrower is willing to pay is called interest. So the guy says, oh, that's pretty interesting. I never heard of all that before. He says, yeah. Then the teller says that, if you have some money to deposit in this bank, you can do so. You don't have to walk around with it in your pocket. He says, I don't know about all that. The teller says, oh, sure. There are two types of accounts you can open up. You can open up a checking account. What that means is that you don't have to walk around with all this money in your pocket. You can walk around with a bunch of checks. And then you can write a check rather than walk around with the money, and it's no good unless you sign it. So if somebody's going to steal it from you, they can't spend it. That makes them less likely to mug you. He says, well, that's a good idea. How do I know I'm going to how do I get my money out? Well, all you have to do, and she shows him a check, all you have to do is fill this out right here. This is a set of instructions. Bring it to the bank, and if you want to change this bank issued money for government issued money, all you have to do is fill out this set of instructions, hand it to me, and I will on demand exchange this bank issued money for government issued money. I'll give you your government issued money back. He said, well, that sounds cool. What about this savings account? Well, the savings account is a little bit different. You can't get that money out immediately. You have to give us a little bit of notice, but we will pay you. You mean you're going to pay me money to keep my dollars in this nice, thick, safe vault, and you're going to pay me? Teller says, that's exactly right. He says, well, I like that, but I don't know. I'm kind of like the checking account. I'd like to have some access to my money. And teller says, well, either way, it's fine. You can either open a savings account or you can open a checking account. Here, we carry out your instructions free of charge. Now, carrying out the instructions is called clearing a check. So we will clear your check free of charge. I don't have to pay you anything? No. Well, in real life, you may have to pay for the checks. You may have to pay a service fee. I don't know. I get mine for free. I don't get my checks for free. I have to pay for my checks, but I don't have to pay a service charge or anything like that. So for virtually free, they will carry out my instructions. That's what a checking account is. Here, if I open a savings account, which I also have, they will just give me money. So the guy says, I think I'll open a checking account. Teller says, okay, let me open one up for you. So she fills out all the paperwork. And so what happens is he says, I think what I'll do, I'll deposit $800 in my checking account. I'll just keep 200 for myself in cash. Teller says, okay, that's fine. So here goes the $800 from his pocket down to here. Now that $800 is sitting there in the vault. Everybody see that? That $800 is sitting there in the vault. He only has $200 left. So here's $200, here's $800. Now, why is this bank doing this for him? This is the reason. See this woman right here? She wants to open up a widget factory. She's dreamed all of her life for opening up a widget factory. She just cannot come up with the money to start it up. She's going to need some startup money. She's going to need some capital equipment. She's going to have to rent a warehouse and a factory. She's going to have to come up with a whole bunch of money just to start the thing up, and she doesn't have it. Now she sees a bank. She says, wow, a bank. Oh, look, wow, a bank. Now I don't have to wait to save up the cash to open that widget factory. I can just borrow it. So that's what this lady does. She goes and talks to the loan officer and she says, yes, I'd like to open up a widget factory. And I don't have enough cash, but I'd like to borrow the money to open it up. And the loan officer says, well, I don't know. Will you be able to pay me back? And so she hands him the business plan that she has, happens to have a business plan on her. The loan officer reads the business plan and says, you know what? Yes, I am confident that you will make enough cash, enough profit to enable you to pay us back. So I will lend you the money. Now, how much money do you need? And she says, I need $800. And the loan officer says, well, no, that's all we got in the bank here, $800. And she says, that's all I need. He says, well, that's all we got. She says, that's all I need. He says, listen, let me tell you something. I am not permitted to lend you every last dime we have in this bank. I'm not permitted to lend you every dollar that we have in this vault. Why? Because the government requires that I keep some of this on hand in the vault at all times. Now, the total amount that I have in the bank here, on deposit here at our bank, that's called the total reserves. The total reserves, that's the total amount that I have in the vault. I am not permitted to lend out the total reserves. I must keep some portion of the total reserves in the bank at all times. Now, the portion, by the way, these squiggly lines here, those are dollars stacked up on top of each other. The portion of the total reserves that I must keep in the bank at all times, that's called the required reserves. I can't lend that out. I have to keep that in the bank vault. The amount that I can lend out, those are the loanable funds. Those are called, in banking terms, those are called the excess reserves. So I can loan out the excess reserves. I must keep on hand the required reserves. Now, the proportion of total reserves, the fraction that determines the exact number of dollars I must keep in the vault, that's called the reserve ratio. The reserve ratio. That is the percentage of total reserves that the bank must hold in the vault at all times. Can't lend that out. That's the percentage of total reserves. Now, let's suppose that the percentage of total reserves, as determined by the government, that the bank must keep in the vault at all times is 20%. The reserve ratio is 20%. Therefore, the required reserves are 20% of the total reserves. 20% of 800 is 160. So therefore, this bank must keep 160 in the vault and can loan out the remainder, which of course would be 640. So this bank can lend out 640. Can't lend out the 800, despite the fact that he has 800 in the vault. He must keep 160, enabling him therefore to lend out 640. The loanable funds in this bank are $640. She says, okay, I'll take it. So she takes the 640, leaving the bank here with 160. So here's the situation now. She's got that, here's that 640 going to her. She's got the 640 now. Now how much is in the bank vault? 160. She goes off and starts her own widget company with that. In the meantime, here's a guy right here who decides that he's going to purchase a widget or whatever it is from this guy right here. He's going to purchase a product from this guy. This guy's going to sell him a product, a Zerk. So, oh no, wait, I'm sorry. The guy with the top hat is going to purchase a Zerk from the guy in the dunce hat. So here's the Zerk. The Zerk goes from this guy, the Zerk maker, to this guy. Now he's holding this box full of Zerks. And so he goes to pay the guy in the dunce hat. He goes to pay him $500. The guy in the dunce cap says, what the hell do I do with this? He says, that's a check. He says, what's a check? He said, a check is a set of instructions. Here's $500 right there. This check is a set of instructions that tells the bank, take money out of my pile, take this amount of money, $500 out of my pile, hand it to you on demand. All you have to do is go in there and on demand present this set of instructions to the teller. That teller will run down here to the bank vault and get you $500 and hand it to you. The guy said, are you sure? He said, heck yeah. So he accepts the check. Now he doesn't have to because that check's not legal tender, but he is confident that when he takes it to the bank will be able to pay it. Well, guess what? He's taking that check to the bank. He says, I demand that you give me $500. The teller says, wait a minute, it's called demand deposits, but you don't have to be an ass about it. He said, okay, I demand that you give me $500. He said, that's better. So he presents the check to her. She goes down to the vault to get his $500. And what does she find? There's only
160. They don't have it.
They don't have it.
Yeah.
You will notice that on the first day of business, this bank goes bankrupt. Cannot pay its depositors. Now, you might ask, yeah, this is a deserted island in the South Pacific, but is this the way a bank runs in real life? In highly developed, sophisticated, mature capitalist economies, like say that in the United States? Answer, yes, that is exactly the way in which the banking system runs in these highly developed capitalist economies. It's this Ponzi scheme that you were referring to, Mark. And this system of banking is called the fractional reserve system. The fractional reserve system. It's called the fractional reserve system because you will notice that only a fraction of this bank issued money, only a fraction of the bank issued money. There's potentially $800 in, there's potentially 640 in bank issued money out there. Actually, this guy, he deposited 800 in. Yeah, potentially $800 in bank issued money, but it's not backed dollar for dollar with government issued money. It's backed by only a fraction of these bank issued money is backed by government issued money. That's called the fractional reserve system. Now, why do we use the fractional reserve system? How successful is the fractional reserve system? And are there any drawbacks to using the fractional reserve system? Well, we use the fractional reserve system because this is the only system that permits banking institutions to be profitable. We want banking institutions to be profitable because what we want is a private sector banking institution. We do not want the banking system to be run by government. Now, true, there is a Federal Reserve System, but overall, we want the banking system to be private. And that is so interest rates will adjust to the needs of the economy immediately. Let's say the economy is heating up and it's expanding very fast, and that aggregate demand curve is shifting to the right, and economic activity is going hand over fist. Well, the problem that's going to produce, of course, if it gets too hot, is it's going to produce inflation with that aggregate demand curve shifting to the right. If it shifts too far to the right, it'll produce inflation. Now, what's going to happen in order to take advantage of that expanding economy? All these entrepreneurs, like this woman right here, all these entrepreneurs are going to run to the bank and want to borrow money so that they can open up businesses themselves and they can buy stuff and everything like that. Well, when a bunch of people come to the bank, all standing in line to get the money that's in there, that bank's going to raise interest rates. And that interest rate is going to cool that off a little bit, cool that aggregate demand off, so it won't get too heated up. Now, what will have to happen in order for the bank to raise interest rates? Will they have to have meetings? Will they have to have committees? Will they have to have votes? None of that. The boss says, raise up interest rates a half notch. Boom, it's done overnight. Or the boss says, hey, take interest rates down 3/4 of a point. Done overnight. No meetings, no negotiation, none of that crap. The interest rates adjust immediately. So that is why we want a private sector banking system. And there can only be a private sector banking system if it is profitable, if banks are profitable. And the only way to make a bank profitable is through the fractional reserve system. Now, does the fractional reserve system work? Yes, it does work. And the success of the American economy and the economies of the industrialized democracies, the capitalist democracies all over the world, all of which use the fractional reserve system, attest to the fact that the fractional reserve system is profitable. Does it have potential drawbacks? Indeed, it does. Is there something we can do to mitigate those potential drawbacks? Yes, there is. What are the potential drawbacks of the fractional reserve system? And what can we do to mitigate them? Come back next week and we will discuss more about the banking system, and we will finish up monetary policy. In the meantime, keep an eye out on the course website. Of course, you'll get an email for the posting of your 5th test. The 5th test will be on fiscal policy. Okay? Fiscal policy is module 9. You do that stuff in module 9 and watch last week's episode on fiscal policy, you'll be in good shape. Like the other tests, you'll get 4 attempts. What I would suggest is that you open it up, see what you understand, and make note of what you don't understand. Then look through the next lecture notes, look through the textbook, look through the videos to find the answers to what you don't understand. And if you don't find those answers, post a question or comment to the discussion board. And I'll be all over it. Then you go back for your second iteration, then the third, and then the fourth. By that time, you should be getting 100 on it. Okay. The deadline will be next Monday, whatever next Monday is. Monday night. Of course, we'll have our class on Tuesday, finishing up monetary policy. Okay? Everybody know what to do? If you have any questions or comments, all you have to do is post them to the discussion board, and I'll be all over them. Now, I prefer the discussion board to email, and that is because oftentimes, if you email me a question, other people in the class will be emailing me the same question. So if you post it on the discussion board, they will see my response to you. It'll be more like a classroom discussion rather than a private discussion. So let's do that. If you have a question, unless it's personal, of course, if you have a question or comment, please post it on the discussion board. So once again, I will post test 5 on fiscal policy tomorrow, I believe tomorrow. And you'll have the rest of the week. You'll have 4 iterations, 4 attempts. And then when we come back next Tuesday, we will finish up monetary policy. And after we finish up monetary policy, I will post test 6. And then after you finish test 6, guess what happens? We have a final exam. Okay? Anybody have any questions or comments? Everybody good? Okay.
Yes.
So we will see you on the discussion board, or if I don't see you on the discussion board, we will see you back here next Tuesday night. But remember, you have a test due next Monday night. Okay?
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor. Have a great week.
All right. Thank you all. I enjoyed being with you once again. Thank you all so much. I'm ending the recording now.
Have a nice evening.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye.